So we begin with an apology today. My name is Brandon Adams. This is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We are now on every platform, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. So good morning to everybody. First and 15, so today, disaster there on that. That's totally on me. Had a little bit of a mishap, and unfortunately today, that is what it is. We'll take a giant L there on that and promise to come back and do better tomorrow. Now, here's what we will do. We'll take a few comments here for a moment just to kind of establish the pace of everything today and allow everybody to kind of be rock and roll, ready to go there on the other side. We also have a great show coming up for you there as well. So, and if you're Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, a normal video platform, you don't really notice anything being any different than it always is. But for our first and 15 folks today, we kind of swung and missed on you. And as I said before, that is solely on me. A little bit of a mishap today, and I really, really hate that. But nonetheless, it happened. I will get the criticism I deserve for that. I will absorb that because I have very thick skin. And then after that, we will be ready to go. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to kind of pretend it's first and 15 now, even though now technically it's no longer first and certainly not quite 15. And then after that, we have a great show. We're going to actually revisit something today that Kirby Smart said last year that was kind of funny when he said it. And it's still sort of funny now, but it's actually pretty relevant because of something else that's going on around UGA. So we're going to do that here coming up in just a couple of moments. That's going to be really fun. Also, Kirby had a kind of a cool exchange with the SEC Network folks, our friends Marty and McGee, you know them. As it relates to Stetson Bennett, we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to use this today as a little bit of a springboard for why it is that I think that Stetson actually maybe doesn't get one degree of credit that he probably deserves, an example of maybe Stetson Bennett's value that's kind of hiding in plain sight. We'll talk more about that here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let's dive in here and get a couple of comments. We'll get rolling after that. Elisha Pitt says, nice shirt. Yeah, I am not wearing my normal attire today. Now, the last time I was dressed up, we were also 100 degrees out in the blazing sun, and I was, sweating profusely. Not doing that today because we are in the pristine conditions of our Dog Nation World Headquarters studios, but I am dressed up today because this evening we do have high school football. There you go. That was me a couple of days ago in the blazing sun. That is not me here today, but Randy Hall also asked me why I'm dressed this way. That's why, because when I leave here today, I'm heading basically over to the stadium, so there's that. DT mentioning Georgia 400. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't mind telling you, DT is 100% right about this because DT is a very plugged-in commenter. Georgia 400 got the best of me today. That's all there is to it. Some days it happens. Georgia 400 got the best of me. Somewhere around, an exit that's not supposed to be backed up. It was already backed up, and we were bad the entire time. I think there must have been something going on 285, and it just sort of messed. Michael Carvel says there was a crash there, and it was just an absolute mess. And some days it just sort of gets the best of you. It just sort of gets the best of you. Today, that is the case. So Michael's helping me with a couple things behind the scenes. And, Michael, when you give me the thumbs up on those two audio clips, we'll be ready to go on the show here. But I'm going to take more comments before we get there. BA's brother from another mother says, I hope no one was injured in the wreck on Georgia 400. Yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of the case here today, and I hope no one's injured there, too. The one thing you always say in a situation like this is, and my wife and I try to say this to each other, although it's not always the easiest thing to keep in mind, is better to be the person stuck in traffic than the person causing the traffic jam, because that means you've been in an auto accident. And actually, a few days ago, my wife actually was involved in an auto accident. That's she was fine. She wasn't hurt or anything. But it is a reminder that, there are things worse than being stuck in traffic. Thomas T-Bone 86 says, how about them Braves on a winning streak? First Marlins, now Mets. Yeah, great to see the Braves take 2 games to start the series against the Mets. And also nice to see Michael Harris Jr. locked up now, a long-term deal. Here's the one thing I'll say about this really quick, and it kind of ties into the Georgia thing there as well. So last year, those of us who love Georgia and love the Braves had probably the greatest year we can ever have. Georgia National Championship, Braves World Series. And that is phenomenal. It's tremendous. But even on the other side of watching our favorite teams win those championships, even on the other side of that, to me, the real value in sports are not the occasional moments when you win a championship, right? Those rare moments when you win a championship. The real value of sports is the day-to-day enjoyment you get from following your team. That's really the idea around Dog Nation Daily. We talk a lot about, hey, Georgia and its championship pursuits, things like that. But the real joy of being a fan is just sort of waking up every day and kind of following the news with your team. And college football fans, Georgia fans, obviously at the top of that list, love doing that each and every day, even during the off season. Most of you have been with us every day this summer and this spring and the winter prior to that. And we just like the daily grind of fandom. And the Braves kind of the same thing. Okay, it's cool to think the Braves won the World Series last year. It's fun to think they might win a World Series again in the future. But when you lock up your first baseman over the long haul, when you lock up Harris over the long haul, when you lock up Austin Riley over the course of the long haul. He got some big money the other day. You think about Albies and Acuna. Those are kind of strange contracts, but nonetheless, they are, locked up, for a long time here, there as well. I think the thing that you get the sense of as a fan is that you get a chance to enjoy this daily process of watching these talented Braves players grow up before our eyes here in Atlanta for many years to come. And that's what I like about the Braves and about Georgia and the other teams that I kind of cheer for. It's great to win a championship, but the real joy of being a sports fan is just sort of following the daily process. And for the Braves, I think they're taking big steps through Alex Anthopoulos to be relevant for a long time to come. And I think that Georgia's kind of the same thing on that. All right, let's see what else. Jeff Doak would like to see me get a beachfront studio in Jekyll Island or St. Simons. Yeah, listen, maybe that's one of these things. Maybe one of these days we'll do well enough around here they'll give me that. It's one of those deals where maybe I'll sit here and do the show, but the background behind me will be, the lovely Georgia coast, the Golden Isles. That's something to shoot for right there. That is definitely something to shoot for. That could be a lot of fun. Ken Holcomb says, escape, BA. We can build you a studio up here in the traffic-free mountains of Gilmer County. Hey, I wouldn't mind that as well. Honestly, you know how like the fancy people sometimes are bi-coastal. They sort of live, New York half the year, LA half the year, something like that. My version of bi-coastal would be, hey, if you gave me a nice North Georgia mountains, I'll take a cabin. I don't need one of these big, huge, mammoth compounds that rest on, the tops of these peaks. You just give me a little cabin in the mountains, a little condominium on the beach. That'll be my version of bi-coastal. I'll spend half the time in the mountains, half the time on the beach, and I wouldn't have any problem with that whatsoever. J. Bob says we need a dual repeat with the Dogs and the Braves. I like that. Good to have J. Bob checking in here there as well. We're going to start the regular show here in just a moment. Michael, are we good on that? We almost ready. Let's take a couple more comments, then we'll get ready to do that here in just a moment. Our buddy Mike Griffith will stop by. We're looking forward to having him there today. Keith Finney says the Braves brought out the brooms, the sweeping, y'all, and yeah, listen, my son got to take a friend last night. My wife, they went to the Braves game. I joke with our video audience about this. I had to stay home and do homework. I've got 2 high school games tonight, 3 on Friday, another one on Saturday. So I was quite busy doing a lot of that, and they were enjoying themselves at the game, and so that was a fun thing to be able to see. So they had a great time last night. They really did. DT says, good thing we have AAA. Listen, DT's right about this. This is actually true. So when my wife had the wreck the other day, we had to call AAA. It's one of those things where at first I thought I could drive the car, and it's easy to joke about this now because nobody was hurt, things like that. But at first I thought I could drive the car, but it was kind of doing like one of those wobbly things where it's like, oh boy, I don't believe I can drive this. It's like some of you stumbling, speaking of St. Simons, it was like some of you stumbling out of Brogan's after a Friday night before Georgia-Florida game, just kind of weaving this way and that way, kind of stumbling around, and that's what the car was kind of doing there at that point in time. And so I thought, ooh, I can't drive this, and come to find out it was totaled, and now we have a new car. So my wife and I actually, we're sort of, in some respects, kind of frugal, I guess. We could pretty much buy whatever car we want to, but we just don't do stuff like that, really. But now we got a nicer car. It's actually kind of exciting. And so, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. William Perry says, me and my sign made that Stetson piece. It's been 0 years since Georgia won the national championship. That's right. Somebody shared that with me, William, and that was always a really cool thing. A very, very fun sign. I was glad to see you got a little J. Bob says, do I only own one dress shirt? I actually own several of the same shirt. For whatever reason, like my sort of dress shirt uniform is sort of like the basic blue. For some reason, I sort of feel like I look better. I don't want to get too deep into all this because nobody cares, but I sort of feel like I look better in blue than I do in white. So I wear a lot of blue dress shirts. That's kind of my deal there. All right, so we are going to get ready to go here. Good stuff. Scott Harris, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. It's Mike Griffith later on. ESPN's ranked the top 100 players in college football. Georgia's got a couple of names pretty close to the top here on this. That's pretty interesting. A little bit of credit going towards Stetson Bennett for something that I think kind of seems obvious to me, maybe, but maybe kind of hides in plain sight there a little bit. Plus, off the top of the program, this is both a little bit funny and also kind of interesting there as well, that a rant that Kirby had last year that I think we kind of all enjoyed at the moment, I think is sort of feeling a little bit more relevant here today. Big thanks to our buddy Michael Carvel, who's helped me with this, get this ready to go for today because of the aforementioned issues. So it's going to be a great show. I'm really, really excited about this. Happy to have you on board. Mike Griffith later on, too. Eyewitness account from what he's seen from Georgia practice. A lot to do. Let's get to it. It is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of Dog Nation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DogNation.com. This is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So Kirby Smart's going into his 7th year being head coach at Georgia, and over the course of that time, there have been a few moments here and there where he's had some pretty entertaining press conference moments, and we can kind of go back and relive some of those. And there's one in particular that's kind of back on my mind a little bit today, both because it is incredibly funny, and B, I think it's also incredibly relevant there as well. Now, I want to play this for you, and we're going to set this up for a conversation we need to have in today's show because, as I mentioned on yesterday's show with Connor Riley, something I think came out on Saturday that's not necessarily the I guess the sexiest type of topic. If you're Paul Feinbaum, the SEC network, you're not paying super close attention to this. This is not moving the meter necessarily in terms of the more, less plugged in, I guess, observers to Georgia football. This is not going to necessarily rise to their level of notice. But if you're someone who listens to this show on a regular basis, if you're someone who's kind of, deeply entrenched in Dog Nation, you are quite aware of this as a storyline. And I think on Saturday, Kirby gave you some pretty good news related to this. But in order for it to sort of make all sense, I want to go back to last year for a moment because I'm going to play this for you. So last year, Georgia had Darian Kendrick, cornerback. Now, you know the story with Kendrick. Kendrick came over from Clemson, and this was an example of Georgia getting a very high-profile transfer. That's a guy that had been all-ACC performer at Clemson. And when Kendrick first arrived at UGA, I think it was treated as a really big deal. It was also kind of a hot topic because Kendrick had been kind of good for Clemson during the regular season, but not always great for them during the postseason. In the college football playoff, there was some debate going on about what kind of player that Kendrick would turn out to be. That had been a little bit of an issue. But for all the intensity around the discussion of Kendrick when he first transferred to Georgia, I think this is probably because of how overall deep and talented the Georgia defense was. Once Kendrick got here, he kind of just sort of blended into the scenery, and I'm not saying that in a critical way of him. I think he sort of did his job last year, but because of the very boisterous seasons that guys like Nakobe Dean had had, and guys like Jordan Davis had had, guys like Devontae Wyatt had had, Trayvon Walker became the number 1 overall pick. All of a sudden, there's so much attention being splintered off all these other places. And a guy like Darian Kendrick, it's not fair to say that he got lost in the shuffle, but he just sort of quietly did his job, and over the course of the year, the once big-time, talked about transfer player, as the season progressed, he really wasn't talked about all that much. However, it seemed obvious that he was doing his job well. There is an analytics site called Pro Football Focus. Some of you are very well aware of Pro Football Focus. Some of you don't really care about this kind of stuff at all. I'm sort of halfway in between, I guess, both of those worlds, maybe a little bit. But Pro Football Focus has always been, for whatever reason, and last season certainly, very enamored by Darian Kendrick and all those sort of like fancy stats they use and throw around all the time. All of that, was just sort of a very prominent social media discussion last year where it's like, it seemed like Kendrick wasn't always getting a ton of attention from maybe a show like this because we're too busy talking about the other defensive players. But Pro Football Focus was sort of talking about Darian Kendrick all the time. And at one point last year, Kirby Smart, during the press conference, was asked about Kendrick, and the Pro Football Focus stuff was referenced here, this sort of analytics, fancy stats type website. And Kirby Smart had sort of a memorable rant about, I guess, his distaste maybe for that particular website. I thought it was funny then. It's relevant now for reasons that I'll explain. But first, just because it's kind of fun to do this, let's go back and hear kind of a classic Kirby rant.
Impressive analytics on Darion Kendrick. I can't validate what they are, but just quantifying how well it looks like he's playing. Can you comment on him specifically, what he's done for the defense this year? And do you think at some point we'll get a chance to visit with young Mr. Kendrick?
I'm not sure about that, but I don't know what analytics should be going by, because what I found is you're referencing PFF, or what are you referencing?
Right, I'm not sure what the
source.
The ultimate source of it.
Is
but
what?
It was like several people used no touchdowns, percentage of completion.
I think those things are a joke, really, personally, because when we go talk to NFL scouts, they laugh at PFF or whatever the source may be to get it. What they do is they use them to pull up to evaluate guys. But a lot of times PFF is a guy that works as another job during the day, and that's just his secondary job to chart whether or not DK or Nakobe Dean or Trevon Walker or Warren McClendon, Jamari Saylor did their job, and their evaluation is probably not as important as ours. Now,
so that's Kirby Smart kind of going in on Pro Football Focus there a little bit about how somebody that works another job and he's just sort of doing this as a hobby or whatever it is that he's saying. And I think at the time a lot of us were like, gosh, Kirby's going in pretty hard here on the analytics, folks. And listen, PFF is not everybody's cup of tea. That's fine. But at the time, it was a little bit interesting to hear Kirby Smart go into as much detail about that as he did. But let me tell you why I think this is relevant here today. It's because the truth is that Pro Football Focus really did have a lot of so-called analytics that sort of backed up the fact that Kendrick was having a very good season for Georgia a year ago. And maybe Smart believes that, maybe he doesn't. Sometimes he just doesn't want to play along with the narrative. Sometimes it's sort of hard to know. But the Pro Football Focus folks did have some analytics based on the Kendrick year a season ago, essentially saying that he didn't give up a touchdown and, they had all these, things about how many snaps he was on the field without allowing a touchdown, whatever else. That was just kind of their argument. And the non-sort of fancy stat world on this, the non-sort of analytics world on this, kind of also seemed to notice the Darion Kendrick year too. He was a second-team All-SEC from the coaches and the AP there as well. So in addition to getting some love from Pro Football Focus, he also kind of got some All-SEC love at the end of the season, despite the fact that during the year last year, Darion Kendrick really wasn't being talked about very much. And I also understand he's had a pretty good NFL training camp here thus far there as well. I think it's with the Rams. I think he's had a pretty good training camp thus far too. So Darion Kendrick's a good football player, but it seems like a lot last year we weren't really quite talking about that, which kind of leads us to the present tense and why what Smart said then sort of feels relevant here right now. Because if you really pay close attention to what's happening around Georgia, I think one of the most prominent issues facing this team as it heads towards the start of the 2022 season is what you do in place of the cornerback spot that Darion Kendrick operated in a year ago, the spot opposite Kelee Ringo. The fact of the matter is Kelee Ringo has a chance to be a very high NFL draft pick. He's very likely to be a first rounder. He could be like a top 10 or top 15 pick. That's the kind of talent he seems to bring to the table on the one cornerback side. But on the other cornerback side, you had a guy like Kendrick a year ago playing at all SEC level, getting tons of love from a website like Pro Football Focus. And what you do in place of that is kind of a significant issue. It's one of the reasons why I thought Saturday was so interesting for Georgia and hearing from Georgia coach Kirby Smart, because Kirby Smart was asked directly. And yesterday we talked to Connor Riley about this a little bit because I'm pretty sure Connor's the one that asked this question. But I thought very quietly Kirby Smart gave Georgia fans some pretty good news. To me, it sounds like right now the battle to be the replacement for Darion Kendrick is going really pretty well. It sounds like Kamari Laster's doing well in that respect. And it sounds like Nyland Green's kind of doing well in that respect too, because as we said earlier this week, Kirby Smart does not throw around compliments very often and certainly very, very easily. He's slow to want to praise, including with Darion Kendrick in the PFF rant from a little bit before. He just doesn't act too effusive with his praise from time to time. But he didn't really hold back in giving some compliments to both Laster and Green the other day. So maybe one of these off-season issues for Georgia, one of these unanswered questions prior to the start of the season, maybe it's on its way towards a positive answer. Let me let you hear Kirby in his own words from just this past weekend as maybe some proof of that. Here's Kirby.
Yeah, both those kids are smart, savvy, tough, physical. I love the way they tackle and play. I thought Nyland had some good physical tackles for him. Kamari is one of the best tacklers on the team. So it's a lot more about covering at that position than it is tackling. And Kamari did some nice things, gave up some plays. He had a really good day the other day where he made a couple plays on fade balls on AD. And, Kamari's fighting his tail off for that spot and to help us in some special team spots. But I'm very pleased with the growth of those guys. We won't get through the year with just those three, though. We're going to have 4 and 5 corners to survive the season.
Connor Riley reported yesterday that he thought that Kamari Laster was on his way to being the starting cornerback for Georgia there at that spot. And I said before, this ain't what Paul Feinbaum's talking about, right? Paul Feinbaum talks about coaches and quarterbacks. That's the only subject that comes up on a show like that. On a show like this, though, we get a little bit more into the actual weeds of what's happening for UGA. And replacing Darian Kendrick's a really big deal. And there are a lot of folks out there who say, well, Georgia can't be as good defensively as it was last season. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's just kind of what Georgia's destined to be, something less than the greatest defense of all time, which it may have had last year. But watch these open issues. Watch these unresolved questions. And notice when it seems like Georgia's heading towards some sort of resolution for that. And the cornerback spot right now, I think Kirby Smart gave you some good news. Didn't seem panicked about Kamari Laster. Didn't seem panicked about Nyland Green. Obviously, leaving the door open as well for some of these freshmen to be a part of that competition there too. But it sounds like on the basis of what Smart said right there, that they could put Kamari Laster at cornerback opposite Ringo September 3rd against Oregon. And I don't think they would blink an eye towards doing that. And if you're a Georgia fan, you got to notice the good news. It was a day on Saturday that, from the scrimmage standpoint, those of you who were there, I think would echo this. Maybe not great for the defense overall, but it sounds like one of the big competitions in a very important spot in the sort of pass-heavy world of college football that we live in now, that cornerback spot to fill in for what Darian Kendrick did a year ago. Sounds like that could be heading towards a positive resolution, and it sounds like Georgia may be just fine at a position that needs to fill prior to the season opener. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DogNation.com. Got a little bit of a late start today with our first and 15 folks over there at DogNation.com, but we are certainly apologetic for that, but we feel like we're kind of in a good rhythm now, kind of got a good show going here for the moment, so I guess we'll count that as a victory and move on here. We would not be able to do any of this, though, without our friends from Breda Pest Management. I had a little interaction with our buddy Matt Breda on social media this morning because Matt's, in addition to being a big sports fan, a big supporter of our local community, including high school football, a big part of our Corky Kell Classic. That kicks off tonight. Happy to have Breda Pest Management as a part of that, and especially happy about having Breda Pest Management on board for us here on Dog Nation Daily. This is true for a couple of reasons. A, because they kind of help keep the lights on and the microphone running and me clothed and fed, which I'm always grateful for, but also I'm grateful for what they do for you there too. This is the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That means they're taking care of Sanford Stadium. They're keeping it termite free. They're keeping it critter free. They're keeping all of that outside Sanford Stadium, the other athletic venues there too. And that level of strength and expertise and really just the market-leading status they've enjoyed for a long time, they want to put that to work for you there too. And here's one of the ways in which you can kind of tap in and leverage all of their resources to your benefit right away. Everything right now is more expensive than it's ever been before. And for many of you, you may have found that your termite service, your pest control service, is just like that. You get that dreaded letter in the mail. Service costs going up. Well, at Breda Pest Management, they can lean on all of the decades worth of experience they have and the hundreds of employees that they have, and they can put all of those resources together for you and actually give you great service at a lesser price than you're paying right now. That means when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management, you're going to put more money in your pocket instantly. That's what they're able to do for you. So please check out that website, bredapest.com. Now, if you're listening, radio podcast, I'm going to spell this for you. It's B-R-E-D-A. That's Breda Pest Management at bredapest.com. B-R-E-D-A. Check out bredapest.com. Make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your pest control, for your termite service, and you're going to save money instantly just by doing that. All right, we're going to get a fun conversation with Mike Griffith here coming up. We'll get a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report from him. Mike's seeing a lot of Georgia practice here as of late. Gives us some great insight on that coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, I want to use something kind of cool that I saw on the internet as a springboard to have a little bit of a conversation about Stetson Bennett. Now, at the SEC Media Days, it's kind of a weird situation where there's a lot of different rooms the various coaches and players move around to. You've got the big podium where all the media folks are in. There's like another podium that's sort of like a similar type deal. And then the SEC right holders, like it's CBS for now, SEC Network, ESPN, they've kind of got their own room too. And in one of those, all the coaches are always interviewed by Marty and McGee. You know them from the SEC Network and ESPN. There's actually kind of a wild exchange of the day that was shared between like Marty McGee and Mark Stoops, who's been in the news for a lot here lately, including taking a little bit of a jab at Shane Beamer. At least it seemed like he might have been. So sometimes these sort of like Marty and McGee interviews kind of have a little bit of newsworthiness to them. When Kirby Smart sat down with Marty and McGee, it wasn't necessarily newsworthy in my mind, but it was really cool in terms of Kirby Smart being in a good enough mood to kind of go back and reflect on the path that Stetson Bennett has traveled since having been at UGA. And I think this is kind of cool. I think it sets us up for something else to talk about. But at first, just because it's kind of fun, this is Kirby with Marty and McGee on, kind of what he saw from Stetson Bennett when he first arrived at UGA ahead of a starring performance as a scout team quarterback in the postseason of 2017. Here's Kirby with Marty and McGee.
As he walked him up to the stage. And that was my favorite story about it. How has he handled all of this? I think about the first time I ever saw him when he came on the official visit. He was a walk-on. I think about his two parents that were so proud of him, and they had so much confidence. I mean, every parent loves their kid, right? But they were convinced this young man was special and was going to be a great player. And we didn't reward him with a scholarship. We just asked him to walk on. And there was a little something different about Stetson. If you go back and look at the quotes in 2017 when we're getting ready to play Oklahoma and he played Baker Mayfield, that's all the kids talked about. Stetson Bennett came on the radar when they said, man, we got this little guy they call the mailman that's killing it on the scout team. And it made you think there might be something here to this guy.
So I love that, saying, hey, there was a glimpse that there might be something to him even way back then. And listen, a lot of you know this. This is not like a Johnny-come-lately type conversation. This is not like one of those things that kind of only seems true now on the heels of Stetson Bennett having won the national championship. You can go back and listen to Dog Nation Daily from winter 2017, leading into that college football playoff. There were guys like McCole Hardman and others who were calling him the GOAT back then for what he was doing, playing the role of Baker Mayfield, leading into that national championship, or I should say that college football playoff game against Oklahoma, which Georgia obviously won. Bennett got a ton of credit for that. And I think it's important to know, and this is one of those things that no matter how many times you say it, I don't know that it ever quite feels fully true to everyone, but Bennett, because he was a former walk-on, because he's not the biggest guy in the world, because of this, because of that, it's almost like people want to kind of project on him some sort of like Georgia football version of what Rudy was for Notre Dame or something like that. The sort of classic underdog that was just hoping for a chance. And I guess in one way that's kind of true. But in a far different way, the thing that attracted those Georgia players to Bennett back in 2017 was his confidence. And frankly, Kirby Smart has gone so far as to say it actually just wasn't confidence, it was cockiness. And I think that's important to note, that that's what has always made him attractive behind the scenes, is the fact that Bennett has an incredibly high level of self-belief. And over the course of last season, I believe that's one of the things that drew Georgia players to him. They began to believe in him because it was obvious that he believed in himself. And let me make one quick final point, then we're going to bring on Mike Griffith here, and we'll talk about Georgia practice. If you look at the AP poll that came out earlier this week, and if you look at the coaches poll that came out a few days prior to that, and you look at the chatter that's existed around those polls here recently, what is something that everybody says? Is that there's a huge chasm between the top three, Bama, Ohio State, and Georgia, and everybody else, including number 4, Clemson. That's not just me saying that. You don't have to find, you don't have to look very far to find, national reporters, things like that. Pretty much everybody sort of had the same take related to that. Well, why is it then that Georgia is separating itself from a team like Clemson? After all, they played on the field last year. Georgia only won 10-3. Clemson missed the playoff last year, but it's been in the playoff many years in a row prior to that. Where is the separation between a team like Georgia at 3 and a team like Clemson at 4? I think right now you have to point to the quarterback position, whereas for all the accolades a guy like DJ Uiagalelei has gotten, the truth is on the field he wasn't as good last year as Stetson Bennett was. And if you're looking for sort of quantifiable, somewhat measurable, although I guess this is slightly intangible, but if you're looking to kind of try to point your finger towards the Bennett factor makes a difference for UGA. Look at the perception of Georgia compared to Clemson, two teams that have been very good defensively, a team in Clemson that's sort of always been in the college football playoff. But the separation that seems to exist between these two right now kind of centers on the quarterback position. Clemson did not get much last year from a former great recruit. Georgia got a whole lot last year from a guy who wasn't quite or even nearly as heralded as a recruit. And that difference is worth pointing out the distinction with, and it's an example of the fact that Stetson Bennett sort of has Georgia back in the postseason conversation, we believe, here again in 2022 there as well. That is Around the Doghouse. Before we're done here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today, we are going to dive into the top 100 players in college football as listed by ESPN, including a couple of Georgia names very near the top on that. We'll get into all of that. But for now, on everything going on with the Georgia Bulldogs, a lot of eyewitness accounts from practice as of late and some interesting things being observed in the midst of all of that. Let's do it with Mike Griffith here. We call it a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report here on Dog Nation Daily here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DogNation.com insider.
Say hello to Mike Griffith here. Always fun to have him as part of a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report, insider update, if you will. And, Mike, there have been a lot of observation periods for the media as of late. You've had a chance to see a lot here, and I'm curious as you kind of continue to watch this unfold. You're also talking to people behind the scenes too, of course, but based on your own eyewitness accounts and everything else, what are some of your key takeaways about Georgia practice here for the moment?
Gosh, Brendan, there's a lot. As you said, I guess I'll start up front because I think the separator for Georgia is the offensive line. I think Georgia's offensive line is what separates it. Really what separates the best teams in the country is always line play. And I think that's what you start at with Georgia. That offensive line is so good. It just paves the way for the run game. It gives all sorts of protections for the pass game. And it gives Georgia the ability to play so many different ways. And, the pass protection is always good. The run blocking is always good. And I think that's going to be the key to this season is Georgia's ability to run the ball. It always starts with the run game, as Kirby Smart says. We saw that at G-Day. Georgia must run the ball to be effective throwing it. And I think this offensive line is as good as it's been in a while. And I remember now that you had some questions, and I understand that, and maybe I should too. But what I saw from Broderick Jones when they moved him in the game at left tackle in the national championship game, suddenly it seemed like that offensive line came to life, and they moved Salyer inside. I like Tate Ratledge coming back. I think, as you said, he's a street fighter. I think he's tough. And then you've got so many other good options, whether it's returning Captain Warren Erickson, Devin Willock brings a lot of size, Xavier Truss, another jumbo 320 guy. That's going to be the other guard. So I think the offensive line play is a cornerstone that we probably aren't talking about enough because I think that is what makes everything else go. And so other things, Kenny McIntosh, I know you let us show that the other day with that. Kenny with a long touchdown run. There's highlights out on that. Gifted runner, cutback ability. Haven't probably seen a runner this technical since Swift that could bring these different elements, this much versatility. I think that Kendall Milton being out is something to kind of keep an eye on. That hamstring, those can be tricky. But Dejon Edwards is ready to go. Feel very good about the run game and certainly those tight ends. I mean, it's like a room full of superheroes or something. I mean, they're all just so dynamic. And then some speed on the perimeter. Ladd and Adonai Mitchell, both reliable. Kirby with some concerns there. And as you mentioned, Stetson, I mean, he'll be 25 years old this year. I mean, that's a grown man that's playing football with 18 and 19-year-olds. So I think that's an advantage to have a quarterback who will now be in his third year starting football games with improved decision-making, brings an element of mobility there that's very important to the offense, and certainly has shown you that he can throw that beautiful fade off that play action, can really throw that shot play deep ball.
All right, so you gave us a lot to unpack there. I want to kind of go through this a little bit. I want to start the offensive line because, look, we all kind of operate in our own little sewing circles here from time to time. And, a lot of the people that I've been talking to over the course of the last couple of days, Ratledge being held out of the scrimmage on Saturday has definitely raise some eyebrows for some of them. John Stinchcomb saying on the show Monday on the record that he'd be a little bit concerned about this, what's being described as a turf toe. Kirby saying not connected to the Liz Frank thing that kept Ratledge out the previous year. But listen, those of us who are sports fans that kind of been around the block a couple times, the word Liz Frank just kind of sort of lingers in the air because oftentimes these are, challenging issues. And, what some people are saying to me here a little bit here and there is, gosh, I'd be a little bit concerned about the Ratledge situation, having, missed on Saturday after having missed, all of last year. And, maybe it's one of those things where he worked his way into full health over the course of the season, or maybe it was just a blip on the radar and he's fine and he's out there scrimmaging this upcoming Saturday. But, Mike, I don't mind telling you that I don't think that Georgia achieves the best version of its offensive line unless Tate Ratledge is completely healthy. I think that Georgia had a good offensive line last year. I don't believe it had a great offensive line over the course of the season. I think Ratledge would have been a huge difference maker in that regard. I think his health this season could allow Georgia to unlock some potential along the offensive line. And I can't be sure that he's totally healthy right now.
Yeah, well, I thought right from the jump it was questionable whether he'd start. I think, I've been pretty consistent the whole off season saying that this injury could keep him out at the start of the year. But I think, to your point, I think he does work his way in. I think this is something that you don't rush because, let's be honest, after the Oregon game, you've got some breathers in there. I don't think you really get challenged again until, mid-October, maybe Auburn. Early October, I guess. I don't think any. I think you can beat Oregon without Tate Ratledge. And as far as the offensive line, I can't think of a game when they didn't play well. I thought they played well all last year. A lot of the sacks were coverage sacks or blitzes that came in. I wouldn't put any of that on the offensive line as much as I would put it on young receivers early in the year, inability to get open, or quarterbacks not finding receivers maybe later. I think that the line's going to be adequate. I don't think it's a concern. There's just so many great options when I think about Warren McClendon being a third-year starter, and I think about Broderick Jones being a first-round talent at left tackle. I think about Cedric Van Pran and his leadership and toughness, and maybe even an upgrade over the guy that played it in front of him. And then just the depth at guard. We just go right down the line. My goodness. There was only 4 game captains that returned. Warren Erickson came back, and look, I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, but he's assignment sound, and it's not like Oregon is the monsters of the Midway. Utah ran for 240 on him last year and 190 in the other game, so it's not like you're opening up against Alabama.
I have zero concern about the Oregon game. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I've got zero concern about the Oregon game. I would agree with you on that.
Yeah. So my point, I think if if it takes till October, and I agree with you, they're not their best without Tate. I absolutely agree with that. But I still think they're the best offensive line in the SEC.
That's interesting.
Even without him.
So you mentioned me on Monday talking about Kenny McIntosh. I want to get into a couple of these things with you here for a moment because areas in which Kirby Smart was maybe a little more willing to offer compliments than you might normally expect him to do, that is the kind of thing that as, media member, fan, whatever you want to call me, that I do lean in a little bit more closely on. And I thought that Kirby gave McIntosh quite a compliment the other day. And, I think we all have a list of guys that we're sort of most intrigued to see for the upcoming season. And based on some of the, once again, sort of sewing circle whispers that come out of some of these practices, but also Smart on the record, McIntosh is on my list of a guy that I'm really intrigued to see what he looks like in a little bit more of a featured type role this year. I don't mean solely featured, but more featured than he was a year ago because of the presence of James Cook and Zamir White on this roster. Dale McGee calling him a complete running back, the kind of guy that can be obviously a weapon in the passing game, but the kind of guy that you don't have to worry about between the tackles there too. I think that McIntosh is an incredibly interesting player on this team, Mike.
Yeah, I think it's very perceptive of you, Brandon, and listening to coaches, there's usually 2 main trends in the art of reading between the lines and understanding the book, interpreting the book of Kirby, as I like to call it, right? And it's 2 things. Typically, they either try to speak things into existence or they double down on something they don't want you to know. Or there's also the time then the intentional call out, right? Calling out a guy over the microphone at practice while the media's there. We're only there 11 minutes. The coach knows exactly what players he wants to put on notice so that mom and dad and coaches back home and cousins and aunts will all message and say, I read about you on Dog Nation that Coach Smart called you out. Is everything okay? And then the kid is like surrounded with these pressures, and Kirby doesn't have to be the bad guy. He's like, oh, yeah, well, those media guys, they'll get you. Yeah, well, yeah, coach, you called my name out in front of everybody. But to your point on Kenny Mack, again, I think he's the most skilled runner since Swift, and I'm not ready to put him in that category yet because I think Swift belongs with the greats, with the Chubbs and the Todd Gurleys of the world. That's a whole nother level in my book. Could he be a Sony Michel level right now? Probably. South Florida guy, played on special teams. Some similarities there. Likes the single digit. The big thing that Kenny brings you that you haven't seen since Swift is that cutback ability. And when you've got a guy that's got that vision, seemingly the eyes in the back of his head that can go back across the grain, it does a couple of things. It changes the way teams play you. They can't be so fast to just swarm to the ball. Because if they go too fast and you've got a runner like Kenny, he cuts back. You start designing plays. You start designing trap plays for a guy that can change direction and accelerate like that. Now, as to why Kirby would be so effusive with this praise, they're going to have to rely on Kenny, I think. I'm just not, again, Kendall Milton is a guy that I think we all believe has a tremendously high ceiling that belongs in the same conversation as far as potential greatness, maybe a fantasy football league starting running back one day. But he has been oft injured with the sprained knees the past 2 seasons, late in the year, and now the hamstring. And this is a concern. And it's not that he's done anything wrong. It's just this is football. This is what happens. Attrition's part of the game. Mm-hmm. And while I think we're comfortable that Dejon Edwards is assignment sound and ready, at least Kirby said as much, we haven't really seen him get those frontline carries. So it's a little bit of an unknown. Not a complete unknown. Not quite as much of an unknown as the freshman backs would be. But, oh, by the way, they're next up. So there's really not the depth in the backfield. I think we all agreed that maybe they're one back short from where they would like to be in terms of quality scholarship backs. So I think a lot's going to be on Kenny's shoulders early. I think he'll be used a lot. I think that he'll be the answer when teams try to really keep an eye on those tight ends and receivers. I think it's going to leave that pass, that swing pass underneath open, and Kenny's going to have an opportunity to make some plays. And he's shown some good chemistry with Stetson in the past.
So I want to try to do 2 issues in like the next 5 minutes. I want to try to cover 2 things here very quickly. Let me start at wide receiver. You and I did a video on Saturday together after we both saw a little bit of practice. You see these practices all the time. This was a little bit unusual for me to get to be in Athens, and I was glad to have been there. And I told you on Saturday, Mike, that I wanted to watch the receivers in particular because this is immediately in the aftermath of the latest Arian Smith injury, and I don't know. I just think that wide receiver is one of those positions for Georgia right now that I am the most, I guess, curious about. And I don't mean pass catchers. I think that Georgia's pretty good in the pass catching department, but specifically wide receivers, I'm a little bit curious about at the moment. I talked on the show earlier this week that if you look at Georgia year after year after year under Kirby Smart, that you see every year like 2 of the 3 top pass catchers each year are kind of new guys. They weren't guys who were sort of top 3 guys a year before. That there is a door open either for a Kieras or Dominic coming back from injury or a Dylan Bell stepping in and doing like what a Donnie Mitchell would have done a year ago or what a Ladd McConkey would have done a year ago, or maybe it is just another tight end that kind of elbows his way into this and pushes the wide receivers out. But I got to tell you, I don't know that I'm all that much closer to figuring out exactly what Georgia has at the receiver position right now. Do you feel like you do?
Once again, I think we're on the same page here. You didn't use the word concern. I noticed you used the word curious.
Yeah, sure.
I would go. I would go to the next level. I'm going to take it to the concern level because Kirby Smart addressed this, and he said every year, they're short, and they got guys that transfer out. I mean, let's not ignore the red elephant in the room. Jermaine Burton would sure look good in a Georgia uniform right now. Justin Robinson may be a guy if he develops properly. They're talking that good old Matt is doing some things at Arkansas. Now, remember him? I mean, goodness gracious, he couldn't catch a cold in a game, and yet he looks like he might be an Arkansas stand. Georgia's had a lot of receivers transferred out, and that's a horse that you and I beat to death over the former receivers coach, and whether we believe it was valid and related to him or not, I guess we'll never really know. But to your point, I go back to 2019. I go back to 2019. And I used a circus term to describe the receivers group that year that you did not approve of, so I won't use it again on the air today. But I did not think that they were effective with Jake Fromm, who did not get worse as a quarterback. He got better, but he regressed statistically because the receivers were often injured or not assignment sound. And thank goodness for Lawrence Cager, or you don't have another top 10 season, by the way. So to your point, this position has been tricky. And Kirby called it out. He said every year, the good ones leave early, and if they don't get the ball enough, they leave. So we've seen transfers. We've seen guys leave early. And to your point, every year it's somebody new. Now, I feel really, really good about Ladd McConkey and A.D. Mitchell. I think these guys are rocks. And Karis Jackson, too. These are proven players. You've got 3 proven guys. You can go to the bank on these guys. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, hopefully he stays healthy. A guy that is in development, maybe this is his swing year. If he rounds into form and you've got those 4 solid guys, and Dylan Bell comes on, or the Morissette kid with the hyperextended, you just need a couple of guys to come on. So, but the depth is a concern. You lose 1 or 2 guys, and to your point, BA, we've seen this before. So, and now I do think that having a guy like Brock Bowers eases the pain a little bit. Interviewing him yesterday, he does not look like a tight end. I'm just going to tell you.
Yeah.
He doesn't even look like a football player. I mean, you get up on him, you're like, this is it. This is the guy. This is the All-American. You expect the Captain America muscles, or and he's strong to be sure. He's fit, but maybe that's what's scary. He's got room to get even bigger, stronger. The legs and the build and the speed and the hands, all undeniable. But he's not the force in terms of size that Eric Gilbert is. And it's just noticeable, or Darnell Washington for that matter. But he's more built like a receiver. So I think you're fine there in terms of number of pass catchers. I feel like those tight ends give you enough of a depth and options that I wouldn't sweat it too much at this point. But to Kirby's point, I do think that unit is a little thin and worth keeping an eye on. All
right, so I know I told you I was going to try to do 2 issues. I actually now kind of want to respond to something on that, and we'll just sort of finish off by doing this in a quick moment. Let me remind folks, though, this is our Insider Update with Mike Griffith, presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. They bring their practice report to us each and every week here on Dog Nation Daily, and they also do plenty of good things for you there as well, because the Georgia Farm Bureau agents live and work and do life in communities just like yours and just like mine all across the great state of Georgia. That means they are invested in what we do here, the land that we stand on, the lives that we live. They're a part of all of that. And they're taking great care of us when it comes to auto insurance and home insurance. That's just what the agents at Georgia Farm Bureau are all about. They're always the home team. They love our state. They're a big part of the high school football scene and the stuff that we're doing here. And they just love taking care of Georgians because they are Georgians in communities just like ours all across the state. So please make sure you check them out, gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com for a lot more from our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And you can find out for yourself why they truly are always the home team. All right, so Mike, I think you bring up some interesting points about who's not here when it comes to Jermaine Burton. But here's what I can tell you, as honest as I know how to be. Let's say that Jermaine Burton didn't transfer away from Georgia. Let's say that he didn't go to Alabama. He's still here. I actually don't know that my questions about the wide receiver position would be any different right now than they otherwise would be. I think that Jermaine Burton's a good player, certainly a good talent, but being on the field a pretty good bit last year, I don't know that he had demonstrably a better year than Ladd McConkey, A.D. Mitchell did. That's not me trashing Burton, because I said before he's a good player. But, it's not like Burton set the world on fire himself in a Georgia uniform a year ago that maybe Georgia would be fine with him. Maybe Georgia would be fine without him. I don't know that he's proven himself to be better than McConkey or Mitchell, really either one right now. So for me, whatever Georgia is or isn't at wide receiver, I think that for me would remain true whether Burton was here or not.
Yeah, another warm body, a guy with a 197-yard game behind him. It's hard to do. I haven't seen McConkey or Downey do that yet. They might if they get the opportunities, but a proven player that stretches the field and led the receivers with about 19 yards per catch, those that had more than 10 catches. So the down in and down out, I think more or less be just a quality depth piece. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm with you. I don't think he makes a difference in wins. Although, he did have a couple big plays at the start of the game, what proved to be the game-winning touchdown drive. But I don't know that I would consider him, worth a win or a loss. But I think from a depth standpoint, having another experienced, capable body guy that you've got to worry about, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say the receiving corps would be better with him.
Yeah, you always want more good players. There's no denying that. But yeah. I'm not convinced as of yet that Burton is the game-changing player. All of a sudden, these Bama fans have decided he is because he's wearing a different color uniform now.
Fair enough. I'm not ready to put him in the Jameson Williams class either, and that's why I don't have Alabama number 1 on my preseason poll.
Oh, yeah, we'll finish with this then. Who did you vote? I know you wrote about this, DogNation.com. Who did you vote number 1 in your Super 16?
I put Ohio State number 1. Dynamic quarterback, C.J. Stroud, path of less resistance in the Big Ten. I think that Ohio State is in a good spot, and I feel like I have questions about those skill position players at Alabama, to your point, Burton, and I saw JoJo Earl, the other receiver, got injured, and Bryce Young's like any other quarterback. You got to have guys to throw to. I don't care how good you are. Jake Fromm found that out in 2019. And Burton's got to pan out, and the Louisville's got, and then the Georgia Tech guy. Didn't the Georgia Tech guy skip the Georgia game? Didn't he basically say he wasn't playing in that game? I mean, that was just.
I think the entire Tech team would have skipped that game if they could. So if Gibbs did,
in
maybe
fact, I did skip that. I covered Alabama Auburn, so who am I to speak, right?
Listen, Mike, Tech folks are supposed to be smart. If Gibbs skipped the Georgia game, then he proved he really is a smart guy. Then we always hear how smart these Tech guys are. If he was smart enough to skip that game, then he's proven how intelligent he really is.
You're right. I like Ohio State number 1. I also got Clemson as my 4th playoff team. So that's kind of how I see it. But who knows, BA? I mean, Georgia's going to grow and get better as the season moves on. I think they're going to do what Bama did. Bama just kind of survived last season, barely beat Florida, lost to A&M, should have lost to Auburn. And they just kind of survived and got better as they were rebuilding and reloading with young talent. That's what I see for Georgia. Get over this Oregon game. Just get past these Ducks, and your schedule is really downhill from there. I think by mid-October, the Dogs could really be hitting stride. And some of these young players got to stay healthy. Not as much margin for error with injuries this year with so many young guys. But I think a lot of these young guys are just going to grow and get so much better as the year progresses.
Mike, good stuff. Thanks for your updates at DogNation.com each and every day, and we'll look forward to being back a part of a Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update with you again very soon right here on Dog Nation Daily.
Thanks, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So something about Brock Bowers that Mike said that I kind of agree with, which is that, and tomorrow we'll do more of the Bowers press conference from yesterday. We just didn't have time for that on today's show. We're just so crammed these days, it seems like. But we'll do more of that tomorrow. Bowers is different than the other tight ends. Like, this sort of like dream team of tight ends, this sort of super friends collection of tight ends. It's like Darnell Washington's superpower is clearly his size. And I don't know, for whatever reason, Georgia's always had obviously big football players, but there's something about Darnell that just it almost seems like he's a Photoshop in real life where they just sort of keep making him bigger and bigger and bigger. I swear I feel like he's 3 inches taller every time I see him. He just stands so much bigger and taller than everybody. Wearing the number 0 makes him even more noticeable, and you're just kind of overwhelmed when you see it. And Eric Gilbert's kind of his own version of that, I'd say, a little bit. I think that Oscar Delp looks really good in a uniform for an incoming freshman. There's a little bit of a wow factor to his size there, too. Number 19, when you first see him on the field, that's not his superpower. He is not visually overwhelming just by looking at him. But when he runs, and y'all saw this yourself during the games a year ago, when he runs, that's where he becomes this, oh my gosh, did you just see that? It's not until you see him in action that you realize exactly what it is that he's bringing to the table. That he can kind of have, I think Mike may have called it unassuming. Maybe that's the case. But when he plays, it's that catch the foot, he's gone. I mean, he really showed that speed a year ago. And listen, I get plenty of stuff wrong. When I was actually looking at some of this morning, just kind of getting some of the Bauer stuff ready for when we're going to talk about it, I was on this pretty early. Now, there are a lot of people who can point out all the ways in which I've been wrong over the course of time, and I do get plenty wrong. But I was on this pretty early. I was in September talking about Bowers maybe having the most prolific pass-catching year of any Kirby Smart player, comparing him to George Pickens. Even pretty early in the season, he had 6 catches against Clemson, for instance. He was by far Georgia's leading receiver that day in the season opener, and really kind of became the favorite target in every game after that for the entirety of the season. It was pretty obvious pretty early that Bowers was what is it they say in the NFL now? He's him, that Bowers was him, and that is indeed the case there. So fun to hear him meeting with reporters yesterday. We'll play you some of that audio here this week as a part of what we do here. For now, though, we got to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Y'all know I love a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, and I wish I was on one right now. It's a little rainy today. 400 was all backed up as I'm trying to drive into work. There's certainly a moment when I close my eyes and just sort of think, man, it'd be nice to be in the Bahamas right now. Perfect day, Coco Cay. You know, that private island right there in the Bahamas? Man, I just love it. And so many of the Royal Caribbean cruise itineraries take you to Perfect Day, Coco Cay. And listen, I'm not one to tell you what to do, but here's what I would tell you, is that when I start my search for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, I've got 2 planned here within the next few months, of course, after the football season, of course. But when I start my search for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, I'm essentially beginning with cruise itineraries that make a stopover at Perfect Day Coco Cay, because that's how much I love it. It's the private island. There's a thrill side. There's a chill side. And when you sail up towards the island, it's always so cool because you see some of this stuff kind of coming into your vision, into the frame, and you see the tallest water slide in North America on one side of the island. You see the largest freshwater pool in the Bahamas on the other side of that island, and you just realize, man, this is going to be a great day hanging out and doing all the things you do when you're right there in a beautiful, perfect oasis right there in the Bahamas, which is what Perfect Day Coco Cay is all about. So our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can help you out that. You can find them online. Their website, tcava.com, and you can give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. I have a lot of friends that work at Royal Caribbean. They all say the same thing. Your best Royal Caribbean cruise vacation experience is going to come by booking with a great travel agent, and that's what we recommend for you around here, there as well. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today, and I want to kind of keep this focused on just sort of one topic here for a moment. It's related to the ESPN list of the top 100 players in college football. We love lists. Everybody on the internet, for the most part, does, because let's face it, the way in which sports fans show their love for sports is by arguing about stuff. I don't mean like nasty arguments. I mean just sort of fun sporting arguments. And arguing about who's the best players and where they're ranked and what they are is kind of a fun thing to do. However, I kind of want to take this from a slightly different tact here for a moment. So if you look at the list from ESPN in terms of who's ranked where, here's what you see right off the top. Number 1 and number 2, both for Alabama. Will Anderson Jr., best player in the country, according to Alabama. I wouldn't disagree with that. Bryce Young at number 2, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. I don't know that I'd really disagree with that either. I think that both these players are very firmly in the argument to be the best 2 players in the entire country. We have a lot of Alabama fans that enjoy coming on here and messing with us from time to time. If you're a Bama fan, you want to hear me say this, I don't mind telling you. I think that Will Anderson and Bryce Young may be the 2 best players in college football. But this is where the idea kind of changes here a little bit. That does not mean necessarily that the team with the 2 best players is going to go on and win the national championship. Because as you know, even Bama fans are capable of figuring this out. That football is not basketball. In basketball, if you've got Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, you got a big leg up on anybody you might play. If you've got Shaq and Kobe, you got a big leg up over who you might play. If you got Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, you're not in such a good shape. But you know what I'm saying? Some of these like sort of super teams, if you've got the tandem of the best guy and maybe the next best guy, and in some cases that's kind of been true in basketball history, because there are only 5 guys on the floor, then you're probably going to win the national championship or the world championship in the case of the NBA. But in football, even if you got the best guy on offense, there are still 10 other players on the field. And on defense, even if you got the best defensive player, there are 10 other players on the field. And you say, well, Alabama's got good players there too. They obviously do. But the story of a season is not necessarily going to be told by best player in the country, second best player in the country. It's going to be told by everything else that happens around that. So there will be no concession on our part about the upcoming season simply because Alabama has both Bryce Young and Will Anderson Jr. That's not going to happen, because the honest truth is that Georgia's not too far behind on this. When you look at the top 10 here, you see, according to ESPN, Jalen Carter coming in at number 6. I think that Carter is also in the conversation, maybe be the best overall player in the country here this year, but I don't have a problem with Will Anderson starting off ranked ahead of him, but I'm not conceding much in the comparison between Carter and Anderson. I'm willing to let that play out. There's a chance that Carter becomes Georgia's second consecutive number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. Beyond that, you got Brock Bowers, who we were talking about a moment ago. He comes in at number 8. So for a lot of people who just sort of seem like it's obvious that Georgia's going to take a big step back here this season, well, I don't know that a list like this, if you put any faith and trust in it whatsoever, the ESPN ranking of the very best players in the country here for this year, the fact that Georgia already has two of the top-end guys, one on offense and one on defense. And when we talk more about Bowers tomorrow, I think one of the things we're going to kind of center in on is you, for the most part, just sort of have to get rid of the label on him. This is just a playmaker. Earlier in the summer, and listen, I deserve a little bit of grief every now and then. I don't mind getting beaten up on from time to time, but people were kind of mocking me a little bit because I was sort of saying that I don't really want to see Bowers considered a tight end anymore. I want to think of him as a wide receiver, and I think even our own Terrence Edwards said, no, I'm not going to quite do that as of yet. But the fact is, when the Biletnikoff Award watch list came out the other day, and I realized the watch list is not a real thing, it doesn't mean much, but Bowers was on that watch list. He was one of only two tight ends on there. Michael Mayer from Notre Dame was on there as well. So the point is that for a long time, Georgia wouldn't have really had a pass-catching target anywhere near, not top 10, not top 100. How many years in the Kirby Smart era would Georgia not have had a top 100 player when it comes to catching the football? Well, now they got a top 10 player in the entire country there on that. They've also got a defensive lineman. A guy like Keely Ringo shows up on a list like this too. Y'all, if you don't take anything else from this topic, take this. Georgia is more than fine when it comes to the top-end talent required to win a national championship. More than fine. Now, they've got some questions. We talked about, what they're doing at cornerback a little earlier, and, the offensive line, what happens if Tate Ratledge is a little bit more banged up than maybe we initially hoped or thought or whatever else. It's not as if this team is without questions, but in terms of the biggest question, do you have the potential for the sort of top-end superstar-type players required to win a national championship? The answer to that question for Georgia is an emphatic yes. And there will be no conceding, well, gosh, Alabama's got the best players this year. I guess it's their season. Or even for Ohio State, who I don't have a problem being ranked near the top. I think it's kind of odd that there's such a unanimous consensus they should be ranked ahead of Georgia. I think that's odd, and I've told you why before. But in terms of some sort of concession, I guess this year Georgia just lost too much. On the basis of lists like this, Georgia's right where it needs to be. So the season will play out, and all of this will be determined come December and January. But if you're a UGA fan, you care about ESPN rankings whatsoever, I think you take something pretty good from some of what you're seeing there on that, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we'll also take this moment to give a little bit of a shout-out and a call-out for you to participate in something we do each and every Friday around here. We love the weekend. Now, this weekend's not going to be a true weekend for me because I'm going to be working a lot, although I would not have that any other way. But for the most part, we love celebrating the arrival of the weekend, and our friends at the Finished Long Drink are a big part of our weekend plans around here every single weekend. So when it comes to our big finish later on in the week, you enjoying yourself some Finished Long Drink. I've actually already got a few of these upcoming for this week, including a couple of photos. When I see folks enjoying the beach, the mountains, or the lake, or the golf course, whatever they're doing, I always get really jealous because that's where I wish I was in most of these instances. But I'm happy to see all of you having a good time and enjoying yourself. So we want to highlight that with our friends from the Finished Long Drink later on this week. So send us your submission enjoying the Finished Long Drink, and we'll show you off to our audience coming up on Friday as a part of our big finish presented by the Finished Long Drink. And if you're like, well, BA, I hear you talking about this Finished Long Drink, but I'm still not quite so sure what it is. Well, you can go to thelongdrink.com and find out a lot more about that. There are 4 different varieties. There's a long drink cranberry. That's like a cranberry flavor with a gin kick. Long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. There's the long drink traditional in the blue can. It's got the grapefruit flavor. It's a cool story. It kind of came from Helsinki going back to the 1950s. Been in America for a couple of years. It's all over Georgia now, and Dog Nation loves it. So thelongdrink.com, the website to go to find out more about that. Pick yourself up some. Send us a photo of you enjoying it, and we'll highlight you as part of our big finish presented by the Finished Long Drink coming up on Friday. And so every now and then I get a little snarky on Twitter, and it's just one of those things I just like doing. I guess I'm just sort of a sarcastic person by nature. Sometimes you kind of catch that with me doing the regular show. I'm a nice guy, but there's just a little bit of sarcasm that sort of drips into my voice from time to time, and that's probably what you see on Twitter from time to time there too. So I was making fun of Alabama for something yesterday. Honestly, I don't even remember what it was, but a couple of you were kind enough to say that I ought to win the golden shoe. So this was me yesterday about the new NCAA video game, saying it's going to allow you to erase any loss by declaring a rebuilding year. That's what I said about this, and some of y'all were laughing about that. Nate sent this to me saying I don't know. I love the fact that the Stetson Bennett photo from the other day is now a meme. And so Nate sends this to me saying, the Golden Shoe Award goes to Brandon Adams. which is really funny, Nate. So I will accept that on behalf of Dog Nation everywhere. And, Nate, I appreciate you sharing that with me. Very funny stuff there on Twitter. That Bennett picture is getting a lot of mileage these days. And lousy, stinking Gators, they've got nothing to celebrate these days because it's been 4,969 days since they've won a national championship. And 73 days from right now, bad news. Gator Hater Countdown, dogs are coming for them in Jacksonville once again. We don't know how long the cocktail party is going to last, but we're going to enjoy it this year. And we will see you tomorrow on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. You can find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. And today, an example of, in golf, they call it scrambling. I guess there's a scrambling version of football, too. You kind of get yourself in a little bit of a mess, and you sort of work your way out of that mess. Today we had a little bit of a traffic snarl that kind of messed up the start of our show today. Never a good thing, but that's what happened. And yet, over the course of the show, I think we sort of righted the ship and kind of finished things on a pretty good note there. So feeling pretty good about that, all things being equal, if you don't mind a slight pat on the back there for that. And I want to get some comments here on Facebook. We'll do some YouTube and some dognation.com. I can't go forever just because there's so much going on these days, both, on the air, behind the scenes. But I will go a little bit longer than I went yesterday because, A, I shortchanged our 1st and 15 audience off the top, and B, yesterday I don't think we hardly did any comments at all. So that's not good. So let's see if we can make up some of that ground here right now. Ken Feinberg says, not much talk about defensive line, linebacker, or safety replacement after the draft. So let's do this here for a moment. When it comes to safety, obviously that Christopher Smith's one of the best at that one spot, and the other spot, Dan Jackson's there, and you feel pretty good about that. Jackson's had some nice moments. We did talk about this, though, I think it was yesterday, Ken, if you had a chance to see or listen to yesterday's show. Malachi Starks is arriving on the scene, and this was the easiest thing to predict of all time. I literally don't know any Georgia fan who didn't think that Starks could be in line for a pretty good freshman season because, A, he was a very good player for Jefferson, and B, he just is like one of these sort of salt-of-the-earth type guys that just sort of seems like he gets football. And it's like there's a certain personality type that when you see it expressed, I know people can kind of fake things on, brief interviews. I do get that. But there's a certain sort of vibe that some players get who you're like, oh, that guy's going to be fine in college. And Starks is one of those guys where like, oh, he's not going to be overwhelmed by all of this. And thus far, it seems like it's working out exactly as most of us assumed that it probably would. So if you're thinking about Georgia at safety, you got to think about Starks being a big part of that conversation. I would say that right now, linebacker is probably fine. And what I'm saying by this is, I do not believe that Georgia produces a Butkus Award winner this year. The kind of sort of third-year level that you got from Roquan in 2017 or Nakobe last year. The second-year version of Jamon Dumas Johnson probably won't quite rise to that level, but he eventually might be there a year from now. Nakobe and Roquan were far different players in their second season than they became in their final season. It seems like if a guy like Tresman Marshall can stay healthy, he's a part of the discussion. I think young players such as Xavier Sori and certainly Smile Mondon, they're over there too. So the one thing that Georgia has gotten, they've sometimes gotten like among the best players in the country from the inside linebacker spot, but they've almost always gotten NFL draftable performance, solid, above replacement level performance from inside linebacker. And I don't see that being any different this year. I really don't. In other words, if you got Monty Rice and Tay Crowder from your inside linebacker spot, and occasionally Monty was even better than this, but if you got Monty Rice and Tay Crowder from your inside linebacker spot, would you be happy this season? I think depending on how some other things work out, you might very well be. The outside linebackers thing are interesting. Obviously Beal comes back as your leading sack guy from a year ago, but the spotlight's on Nolan Smith. Can Nolan Smith become a big-time pass rusher? That's something that I think Glenn Schumann said the other day that he's working on improving about himself. And, becoming that big pass rusher is such a big story for Georgia this year. If Georgia has, 36 sacks, 34 sacks, then I'm probably going to be losing a bunch of money on New Year's Eve playing blackjack at the Harrah's Casino in New Orleans because that's where Georgia's going to probably be. It's going to take that 40 sack number to be playing in Atlanta, to be playing in Glendale, the two spots of the college football playoff games here this year. You need that big sack number if you want to kind of be back in that playoff discussion. And Nolan can be a big contributor there in that regard this season, and we'll see if it does indeed kind of work out that way. As far as defensive line goes, I think quietly that group might be pretty good. I do. I think quietly they might be pretty good. Randy Hall says, will Pops be the next Nakobe Dean? Pops being Jamon Dumas-Johnson. If that is true, that'll be, if history is our guide, both for Nakobe and for Roquan, that'll be a third-year story. Roquan was good in 2016. He was an all-time great in 2017. Nakobe was good in 2020. He was actually a semifinalist for the Butkus Award. But he became an all-time great in 2021. And if Jamon Dumas-Johnson is the next one of those guys, then there's likely an achievement level unlocked in 2023 that he might not quite bump up into in 2022, at least if history's your guide. Tony Dickerson says, I accept that we're in a rebuilding year, just like Bama was. Yeah, something tells me Georgia doesn't have these rebuilding years. Something tells me that. Let's see what else. Patrick Ritchie checking in. Good to see him there, having a good time. You love to see that. DT saying turf toes, no joke. Yeah, listen, I'm not trying. I mean, listen, there's very little that I know a lot about. Certainly, like medical stuff, I don't know anything about. So, like, the last thing I'm going to come on here and do is, like, sort of like fan the flames of hysteria about, whatever. I'm just not going to do that because I'm not smart enough to tell you who's hurt and who's not and how bad it is, how bad it's not. I'm just not going to do that. But I'm going to say this, that, that's one of those guys I hope to get some good news about. I hope to hear some good news about. And not this, like, thing that seems to happen a lot, where it's like, oh, we think he's going to be fine. And then, like, 10 weeks later, he's still not playing. That's not what I'm talking about. I want to hear some legitimate good news on this because I do think that Ratledge is a very important player. Cam Hasty, going back to the beginning, we always love a solid Kirby rant. I think the thing about the Pro Football Focus thing that I like, because I'm sort of ambivalent about them, we admit that we're a little hypocritical, that we'll run with PFF numbers when they support the point of view that we already have, and we kind of ignore them when they kind of go against our commonly held opinions. So we're probably no different than anybody else on that. But the PFF thing just sort of seemed to come out so far out of nowhere that that's what sort of made it kind of funny. This is good from Richard Dees. He says, who scores first this year, the Georgia defense or Brock Bowers? That's really good. That's really good. Can you imagine? I mean, can you just imagine for a moment? I've already told you, I think that Georgia's going to shut out Oregon. But that's also just me being a blowhard. I'm sort of half saying that I'm not saying I'm intentionally trolling, but there's a part of me that's just sort of saying that for the fun of it. But can you really imagine, though, after all Georgia's defense, I hope you enjoyed last year because now you're going to return back to reality. Can you imagine first drive of the game for Oregon? I wouldn't put it past Bo Nix to do this, but let's just say it really did happen. Georgia started the season off with a defensive touchdown. Can you imagine how that would sort of send the shockwaves? Because this is not like one of those years we've had in some respects where there's like a ton of great Week 1 games. It's actually a little bit of a thinner Week 1 slate than we've had in recent years. Bama's not a part of it. They don't play Texas until Week 2. So, some of those big Week 1 games don't have this year. The Georgia-Oregon game is going to get massive TV ratings. I don't care about that because it doesn't put $1 in my pocket, nor does it put $1 in your pocket. But just as an observation, it's going to get massive TV ratings. So if that Georgia defense comes out and does something big there that day, that's going to be a big topic. Richard, to answer your question, I sort of hope it's the defense just because I think it'd be an amazing thing for sure. Bill Russell says, what's the word on our special teams, generally our specialists in particular? I mean, Podlesny assumes going to be fine. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I did not hear that it was – I heard it was not a great day for the other situations. Jake Camarda was just really, really good. Camarda was really, really good. And, I joke about this a lot. It's like he's so good you sort of forgot about it. Like, kickoffs, you never thought about him. Punch, you never thought about him. I think having a good punter is a real weapon. To me, a punter's more valuable than a place kicker because I sort of like the idea of having a shaky place kicker sometimes because it sort of forces a coach to do what he should be doing anyway, which is going for touchdowns. So I I don't mind having a shaky place kicker every now and then, but you always want a great punter. You don't want to punt much, but when you do punt, you want it to be a great one, and that's just what Camarda was. And he's just a field position machine. And there are going to be some growing pains, it sounds like, in the aftermath of that, at least based on some of the early days here. Dogs on Top says that the Friday picks returning this season. Yeah, we're going to be back picking games. You better believe that. We are. In fact, I had a conversation about this yesterday, and I don't mind telling you this. I'm getting internal pressure. I don't mind telling you this at all. Internal pressure, and I'm probably going to have to succumb to this pressure. So the pick show that we do is one of the more fun things I think that we do, but it's also a lot of work. It just, for reasons I won't bore you with, it's just kind of a lot of work. And like part of the issue is that we enjoy picking obviously the Georgia game, but all the SEC versus SEC games. Our buddy Dari Payro from RS Sanders is a part of this with us. We love Dari. We picked Dari's actually also really good at picking games. And that's not, a joke. He's been above 500, I think, every year we've done this. So he's a legitimate picker. The point, though, here is that we pick the Georgia game. We typically pick the total for the Georgia game. We pick SEC versus SEC games, and then typically pick top 25 versus top 25. That's just typically what we do. That ends up being somewhere between 10 and a dozen games that we'll pick during the season. I'm getting all kinds of internal grief, workplace drama, if you will, related to the call on the part of some to pick fewer games here this year to make the sort of production element related to the show a little easier to put together. So we may be picking fewer games this year based on some of the chatter that currently exists, but the show itself will be returning. Joe Garliardi says, I really think we're going to hang 28 first half against Lanning the Ducks. You may be right, but just keep this in mind here. And some of you don't care a thing about gambling, which is absolutely your prerogative. Some of you know way more about gambling than I do, which is also your prerogative there as well. We're not really here to judge one way or another. This is still Kirby Smart against a guy that worked for him last year. So if you're thinking point spread, I'm not saying that Georgia won't cover the number. They very well might. But if you're thinking point spread, there might be a better way to approach this than that point spread because, it's like 18, I could see Georgia fairly easy covering that spread. I guess, gun to a head or whatever the more politically correct way of saying that in 2022 is. I'd probably take Georgia minus the points there. But if you're thinking about making a bet on Georgia for that game, we'll have our friends with MyBookie back here again very soon. But if you're thinking about making a Georgia bet for the game, I'm a lot more interested in team total for Oregon. And I've kind of half kiddingly, half seriously called for the Georgia shutout. But very seriously, and I haven't seen a team total yet. I was looking at something yesterday. I haven't seen a team total posted on Oregon yet. But you know how you can bet over-under for the game, that's both teams' combined score? You can also bet the team total there too. And I would probably be a lot more interested in going under team total Oregon than I would be Georgia minus the points, because if you need that late score tacked on late, is Kirby going to do that to Dan Lanning? I honestly don't know that he will. But will Georgia work hard for 60 minutes to keep Oregon out of the end zone? History suggests they probably will do that. And so if I'm making a bet on Georgia, I'm a lot more interested in an Oregon team total under than a Georgia minus the points, although you could maybe talk me into all those things there as well. All right, let me go to YouTube over here for a moment. Uncle Sam checks in to say if Kirby and UGA repeated would crush the GOAT. Kirby's the only coach that has the team that could pull this off. And trust me, Saban is well aware of this and will do anything to see UGA fail. I think that Uncle Sam is onto something in addition to being the father of our country. Actually, that's George Washington. What is Uncle Sam? I mean, he's like the mascot, right? No disrespect to Uncle Sam, of course. Also a big fan of Sam the Eagle from the Muppets. Huge fan of him there, too. The point is that I think that Sam is kind of onto something here in that Nick Saban is bothered, I believe, to no end by the success that Kirby Smart has enjoyed. And I think to a degree even the recruiting success that Jimbo Fisher has enjoyed. That Nick Saban likes these former assistants that are willing to be forever subservient to him. And That's what Lane Kiffin is. Saban loves Kiffin because Kiffin is always bowing in deference to Saban. Like that is just a perpetual relationship where Kiffin sort of treats himself as, kind of a child to Saban. He sort of treats Saban as his, daddy almost. I mean, and maybe for someone like Lane Kiffin, that's easy to understand why. Just given the fact that a lot of his career is, because of his last name. But the point here is that Saban is constantly being deferred to by Lane Kiffin, and so Saban just heaps praise on Kiffin all the time. He was a source for a story at ESPN.com about Kiffin, last season. There's a little bit of this with Steve Sarkisian going on too. There are certain coaches that are willing to just sort of always kind of bend the knee to Saban, and Saban loves that. And Kirby's not going to do that. Kirby from the word go. Now, it took Kirby a long time to beat Saban, or at least relatively speaking a long time. But it didn't take Kirby very long to show Saban that he didn't work for him anymore. Remember the Maurice Smith thing back in 2016 when Georgia got Smith away from Alabama as a graduate transfer? And at the time, that was one of those things you didn't know if Smith was going to be eligible, but Kirby and really Maurice Smith's family very articulately fought hard for that and earned what should have happened, Maurice getting a chance to play. And Maurice had a very good year for Georgia, although it wasn't a great year for the Dogs. It was a good year for Maurice, and he was, I think, much happier being at Georgia than he otherwise would have been there being in Alabama. And I don't think Nick Saban liked that at all. And I've told you this before, that I think there was a little bit of a strain in the relationship between Kirby and Saban, and Kirby standing up and being his own man is kind of probably one of the reasons why that has happened. And you better believe that Saban didn't love that, because it just means that one of these days the perch that Saban has enjoyed, he'll be kind of pushed off from. And Jimbo Fisher's kind of doing some of that too. Now, Jimbo, while he beat him head-to-head this past season, not really taking championships from Saban as of yet, but that's one of those guys that's also not bowing in deference to Saban. In fact, he went the exact opposite direction with that there recently. So I think that Uncle Sam's onto something here. I don't think that Saban likes any of that. Jay says, am I still replying to the first YouTube comment? Yeah, every now and then I get a little long-winded, maybe. Maybe that's the case. Oh, my gosh. Is this right? Paul Moon says that we finally had an amicable conclusion to the RBU conversation. The comments today, it's been solved. We can move on. If that's true, that's amazing. Because I swear the YouTube commenters have been arguing about Georgia running backs historically versus Alabama running backs historically for like 3 years. Like, it literally is this argument that's just, over and over. If it was a message board thread, it'd be 9,000 pages by now. It's just over and over and over again. It's the same argument taking place. So that's actually kind of funny. That's kind of fun. That's kind of funny. Let's see what else. I don't know what Kirby's visor saying. Star Wars Dog says, why don't you do super chats and channel members? Because I'm not that smart. Is the super chat thing where you pay? Is that one of the things where you pay? I mean, honestly, this is when we have sponsors, right? And this is what I love. It's like we've got people that sort of pay the way so that we don't have to charge people for things, right? You don't have to charge people for the website. You don't have to charge people for like special conversations. Like R.S. Andrews, you see Brady Pest Management, you see R.S. Andrews. Like R.S. Andrews brings the show to you, but I am actually able to stay here and just sort of talk for a while. I mean, it's already 11:23. Now, some of you say I talk too much about one comment, but we're still just here talking. It's because of our friends at R.S. Andrews, and I never quite know where to point because there's a mirror image on my monitor. But the point is that we don't have to do super chats or like Patreon or stuff like that. No disrespect to any of those platforms because everybody's got to make a living. But we are lucky enough that we have great sponsors that allow us to bring all of this totally for free. So I'm very thankful for that. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson's very funny. Let's see what else. Thomas Van Santa also pointing out that I'm wearing a little bit of a button up today. Yeah, I've got high school football later on this evening, and it's one of those things where, some days last year I'd sort of bring the dress clothes and kind of change after the show was done. Some days, though, it's just way easier to sort of throw on the clothes and just kind of do that and not have to worry about, it's just one more thing for me to keep up with. Like, one of the things you should know about me, and many of you kind of, I think, do sort of intuitively understand this, I'm not the most organized person in the world. I'm a big believer that there's kind of like a sort of conflicting relationship between order and progress. And if you're trying to get things done in life, you're not going to be the most orderly person while you're doing that. And so, me hopefully getting some stuff done and trying to, accomplish a lot of things. There's a lot of loose ends that remain sometimes untied. I'm very prone to just sort of leave something at home or whatever else. So if I try to drag around some dress clothes, that's just one more thing for me to have the potential to leave behind, unfortunately. Let's go. Brandon says, which game would you consider the most losable for Georgia? It won't be a home game, and it won't be week 1. Totally agree with you. Oregon would not be on that list for me, nor would a home game be on that list for me, including a likely top 25 ranked Tennessee team. I agree with you on both those. For me, I zero in on 2 true road games. All due respect, it won't be South Carolina either. I might be a slight under on South Carolina for this season. I think that total's sitting at about 6.5. I might be a slight under on them, although I genuinely think that Shane Beamer's doing a good job there. I think coming back and doing this year 2 may be tough for him a little bit. For me, though, it's at Mississippi State or at Kentucky. If Georgia plays a close game in the regular season, I believe it'll be in one of those 2 venues, Commonwealth Stadium, Kroger Field, or what is it? Is it Scott Stadium? Is that the name of the place in Starkville? I guess I'll find out soon enough. Scott Stadium, is that right? It'll be one of those 2 places. Cody the Dew. Always glad to see Cody in the comments section. Listen, look, this is an anxious time for Alabama fans, and I respect Cody. Cody's a sharp football mind. We have a couple of very good Alabama football fans that are regular part of our comment section. It's an anxious time for them because, listen, when you've had a team that has won as much as Alabama has won, a lot of your personality kind of gets sort of wrapped into, hey, Saban's the GOAT. He's going to, have us taken care of each and every year. Man, Father Time is undefeated. Father Time is undefeated. And I don't know, man. Young Lion in Athens, it remains to be seen who's going to have the best team on the field here this fall. Who's building the better culture right now? Who's building the better culture right now? William Perry checks back in to say, after having been checked out for a while, can somebody repeat everything that's been said? That's very funny. Always very funny, and always glad to have him here. Mike Brown says Mississippi State worries me a little bit with all those cowbells. The other thing that gets said a lot about Mississippi State is this is Will Rogers coming back for a third year as quarterback. Historically, when Mike Leach has had a third-year quarterback, that guy has really been very good for him. Think about Cliff Kingsbury on this. Think about Graham Harrell on this. These are previous quarterbacks that he's had, for 3 years. Now, those were also quarterbacks carving up Big 12 defenses, and this is Will Rogers in the SEC. So that in itself is a far different kind of animal, but that's, kind of one of those things there. It's Rogers coming back for a third year. Also, one of my big takeaways from listening to Leach at SEC Media Days is one of the things that he's really proud of is throwing to his running backs, that he really likes that. And obviously the big knock on Mississippi State is they don't run the ball very well. And ultimately that's why teams like Georgia don't lose to teams like Mississippi State, is eventually you can sort of strangle the passing game because you're not that worried about the running attack. And like the one thing that Leach kind of counters with is, but look at the way we throw the ball to the backs. And he'll say, a rushing yard for a running back and a passing yard for a running back are equal value. Maybe that's the case, although in the SEC, the ability to run at least keeps a defense honest. So my guess is, as we get close to that game coming up in November, that is what we'll be talking a lot about, whether Mississippi State is actually running the football at all, or maybe what Georgia does to try to defend against what might be some relatively potent passing attacks coming out of the backfield. Jonathan Aaron says, if we have any more injuries at wideout, do you see someone like Bowers or Oscar being moved to wide receiver, going to a 3 tight end set more? I think they're going to probably play 3 tight ends, from time to time anyway. And I think that there's a chance that when Delp plays, he may be used like a wide receiver some. And I do think that Bowers essentially is kind of like that anyway. I mean, when he detaches himself from the offensive line, like what makes him not a wide receiver, I guess I might ask. And so, I think that is definitely a part of it. And I do think you kind of root for a receiver. I think you root for a receiver to make you not want so many tight ends on the field because, obviously right now it seems like the tight end position for Georgia relative to the number of guys in the room is so much deeper than what wide receiver is. But if a guy could play well enough for you that all of a sudden you don't feel the need to do that, then that could be kind of a good thing. Kirby's Visor says Arkansas could be 10-2. That is an over that I think I really like. I believe their season win total is around 7. I think I like Arkansas over. And we talked about this earlier this summer. Here to me is the thing that you've got to pay close attention to with Arkansas. For as much as we love Sam Pittman, I do think that Pittman's been a transformational figure for that program in a lot of ways. Take Georgia out of the equation for a moment. Which tandem of coordinators in the SEC would you rather have more than Arkansas's? I mean this literally. If you couldn't have your coordinators at Georgia and you had to pick another set of coordinators in the SEC, but you couldn't just pick one, you had to take the other one. You had to take offense and defense from the same school. Arkansas is who I want. Kendall Browse, my offensive coordinator, that clearly works. Barry Odom is defensive coordinator. He's had all kinds of big offers. Got offered $1 gazillion to go to Texas and turned it down. That's one of the things about Arkansas right now. That's why they are exceeding their overall talent level. The Browse offense, incredibly difficult to defend. The Odom defense, incredibly difficult to kind of match wits against. And they are coaching above the level of talent they currently have. And Pittman, being the kind of coach that he is, keeps those guys there. Part of being a good head coach is being the kind of guy that people want to work for. And Pittman, I think, is easily that. And you see that with what Odom is doing, with what Browse is doing. One of the things that makes Arkansas dangerous here this year is the tandem of coordinators. I honestly believe offense, defense combined, if you take Georgia out of the equation for a moment, that's probably the best in the SEC. G. Grace Bama Boy says, just give me Saban and the Looney Tunes gang. I'm good with that. G also says he's got Arkansas winning 8. Listen, the SEC West, 8 wouldn't be a bad season, really. Jonathan Aaron says, would I rather have 40 sacks or 20 picks? I want the sacks. I do, because, listen, an interception can happen because of a lot of things. A tip pass or just a bad throw. Like, an interception is not necessarily a truly independent variable, to use a phrase that's probably, a little too fancy for me to be using. There's a lot that goes into creating an interception. A sack, though, is almost always generated by either a really good scheme or a really good player. And if you told me which thing could I replicate year over year over year, I want the sacks more so than the interceptions, because if you get the sacks, you may get the interceptions too. You want the kinds of players who can get to quarterbacks, the kinds of coaches who are willing to turn them loose, and y'all, that's just the recipe. It's just the recipe. Paul Moon says 20 interceptions seems like a lot. I'm not even sure what a good season total for that would be. For sure. All right, final comments. We got to go. Foster Moss says the Broderick Jones interview. Listen, I think Broderick's a great story. I do. I think that's a great story, for sure. All right, final comments. Hemingway says the first team defense did well against the pass-heavy attack on G-Day, pinned the ears back, and relentlessly rushed the passer with hands up. Yeah, I hope they can come back and do that again here this season for sure. Herb Hamilton asked a good question. Who's faster, Bowers or Delp? Delp's a good athlete, but I don't think he's beaten Bowers in a race. That's just my best guess on that. Delp is a really good athlete. Bowers, man, he's a speedster. He's a speedster. To even have something close to tight end size, he's a real speedster. Randy Hall, first game tonight kicks off 5:30 p.m. Peachtree TV, CBS46.com online, for sure. Joel Moody wants 40 sacks, dozen INTs. I like that. Hugh Nash says, final comments. Let's stay on YouTube. That's not fair. I was on Facebook for kind of a while. Jacob O'Neill says, when's cover 4 coming back? We have some actual fun stuff coming up video-wise that we're going to do. I'm excited about this. It may be a slightly different version of cover 4, but we're going to do some cool stuff. What else? Barry Watkins also pointing out that Arkansas's got Bam at home this year. That could be a fun game. Could be. Also, Arkansas, historically, they haven't gotten a lot of big SEC home games for a million different reasons. So I'm guessing they're probably pretty fired up for that one. I also think that, having been there in 2020, like Fayetteville's a really cool place. It is easy to enjoy what Sam Pittman's doing there. Pretty easy to enjoy that. Kyle Norton says, now that Kirby Smart's won a national championship, does that give him enough power to change the Georgia-Florida game? It will be a very interesting thing to watch unfold. I think there are some Georgia fans who would say it should, that whatever Kirby wants, Kirby should get. There are a lot of Georgia fans who feel that way. I'd say the situation is slightly more complicated than that. But there are some Georgia fans who think it should be that way, and we might find out that it is that way, that Kirby has – I mean, you hate to make it be like, well, now that you won a national championship, all right, we'll let you have this. But there is kind of a new level of power that is unlocked because of the success they've enjoyed. All right. Philip Jordan Wells checking out. Philip, thanks for being here as always. Barry Watkins, very funny. Also looking forward to seeing Jimbo in Tuscaloosa this year. Yeah, that could be a very interesting game there too. Jacob O'Neill, thanks for the kind words. Lynn Johnson Shipman, always great to see her. All right, we got to go. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you on TV tonight, 5:30 for Corky Kell Classic on Peachtree TV or streaming at CBS46.com. And back here tomorrow for Dog Nation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Also, the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We appreciate them making that possible. You can find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. That is what they are all about. And so that air conditioning unit that you're worried about, well, guess what? You can get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Braves took a second game from the Mets last night. That's good stuff. Read more about that, ajc.com. Nice contract extension for the young Braves rookie, likely rookie of the year, Michael Harris. You can read more about that there as well. Also, high school football around the city of Atlanta, state of Georgia here towards the weekend. AJC's got you on all of that, including our action on the Corky Kell Classic. And another story there from a story we've been covering here for a while. Gabe Harris, the Georgia commit, who was ruled ineligible after transferring to Valdosta, had his appeal denied. So Harris going to be ineligible in the state of Georgia. He may have to think about going to another state if he wants to play high school football here this year. So we'll follow that and see if anything comes out of that. But that could be the next move there for Harris on that. And listen, you want him to have a senior year, and you kind of hate the way this is sort of playing out. He transferred, over to Valdosta, and that's kind of what's resulted in this ineligibility. And so maybe the next move is to kind of maybe exit the state and maybe go down south to Florida or something like that and find a place to play here for this year. But you can read more about that in the AJC there as well. They've got coverage of that on ajc.com. All right, y'all have a great day. Back here tomorrow for Dog Nation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will talk to you then.